A young girl draws a picture of a police dog at school, and what happens the next day leaves her teachers completely speechless. For months, 8-year-old Emma hadn't spoken a single word to anyone at school. But her artwork was about to unlock a trauma so deep that it would bring hardened police officers to tears. What happened when that same police dog walked into her classroom left everyone witnessing it completely speechless. No one could have predicted how one child's drawing would reveal a heartbreaking connection that would change her life forever. In Miss Peterson's bustling third-grade classroom at Oakwood Elementary, every student had a voice, except for Emma Reynolds. The small, dark-haired 8-year-old with solemn hazel eyes hadn't spoken a single word since the school year began 4 months ago. Not during morning roll call, not during group activities, not even when she accidentally tripped in the cafeteria and spilled her chocolate milk across the freshly polished floor. "Emma, would you like to share your answer with the class?" Ms. Peterson asked gently, knowing what the response would be. The little girl simply lowered her eyes, her thin shoulders tensing beneath her faded blue sweater as if bracing for impact. A heavy silence filled the room as the other children shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs, the familiar routine playing out yet again. The other children had tried everything to break through her silence. Birthday party invitations carefully decorated with glitter and stickers, sharing their favorite toys at recess, offering her the first pick of crayons during art time. Even the class hamster, Mr. Whiskers, who could usually coax a smile from even the most troubled child, failed to break through Emma's impenetrable silence. She would simply watch the fuzzy creature with those haunted eyes, her small fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. It's like she's locked herself inside a fortress with walls 10 feet thick. The school counselor, Mr. Abernathy, had told Ms. Peterson during their last meeting in the teacher's lounge. His coffee had grown cold as they discussed the mysterious case that had baffled even the district's most experienced child psychologists. Something traumatic happened, but her parents are just as mystified as we are. According to them, she used to be a chatterbox before last summer. Never stopped talking from sunrise to sunset. Then, suddenly, nothing. Not a word at home or school. The doctors can't find anything physically wrong with her vocal cords. Miss Peterson had tried every technique in her 15 years of teaching experience. Special one-on-one time, alternative communication methods like drawing and writing, even bringing in Emma's favorite books that her mother said she used to love. Nothing penetrated the invisible barrier the child had erected around herself. But on a rainy Tuesday in November, something changed. Raindrops pattered against the classroom windows like impatient fingers as Ms. Peterson instructed the children to draw something that made them feel safe. "It can be a place, a person, or even a thing," she explained, moving between the small clusters of desks. "Whatever makes you feel protected and happy." Emma's usual disinterest vanished in an instant. Her small hand gripped the pencil with unexpected intensity. Her body hunched protectively over her paper, as if guarding a precious secret. The transformation was so sudden that Ms. Peterson nearly dropped the stack of construction paper she was distributing. For 40 minutes, Emma drew with such focus that beads of sweat formed on her forehead despite the room's November chill. She didn't even notice when the lunch bell rang, its shrill tone causing the other children to cheer and scramble for the door. The other children packed up their supplies and filed out in a chaotic parade of lunchboxes and excited chatter. But Emma remained frozen in concentration, adding meticulous details to whatever she was creating with an urgency Miss Peterson had never witnessed before. The classroom fell silent, except for the soft scratching of Emma's pencil and the distant sounds of children racing down the hallway. Miss Peterson found herself holding her breath, afraid to shatter whatever spell had finally broken through Emma's walls. She watched as the girl's small hand moved with surprising precision, adding shadow and texture to her creation with skills that seemed well beyond her years. When Miss Peterson finally approached to tell her it was time for lunch, Emma's reaction was instantaneous and alarming. She quickly flipped the paper over with a sharp gasp, clutching it to her chest with white-knuckled fingers. Her wide, panicked eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal searching for escape, her breathing shallow and rapid. "It's okay, Emma," Ms. Peterson said softly, crouching down to the child's eye level but careful to maintain enough distance not to frighten her further. "You can keep your drawing. No one will take it from you. Would you like to finish it after lunch? I can keep it safe in my desk drawer until then." For a moment that stretched into eternity, Emma simply stared at her teacher, an internal battle visibly raging behind those expressive eyes. Then, miraculously, she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but a voluntary response nonetheless. The first she'd given in months. Ms. Peterson felt her heart skip a beat. In 15 years of teaching, she'd learned to celebrate the smallest victories. But something told her this wasn't just a minor breakthrough. Something significant had shifted in Emma's world, and it centered around whatever she had poured onto that piece of paper. But what Emma had created wasn't just a drawing. It was about to unlock a secret that would leave her entire school in tears and change the trajectory of one silent little girl's life forever. When Emma returned from lunch, she moved with a new determination that Miss Peterson had never witnessed before. The little girl slipped quietly into her seat, her lunch apparently untouched based on the still-sealed sandwich bag her mother had packed that morning. The cafeteria monitor had reported that Emma had simply sat alone at the end of table 6, staring at her hands for the entire 30-minute period. But now, back in the sanctuary of the classroom, something had visibly shifted in her demeanor. With hands that trembled slightly, Emma carefully flipped over her drawing and resumed her work with an intensity that seemed to create an invisible bubble around her desk. The other children, sensing something significant, gave her an unusually wide berth as they settled back into their own projects. Even Tyler Matthews, the class troublemaker who delighted in disrupting others, seemed to instinctively understand that this moment was sacred and not to be disturbed. Emma's pencil moved with surprising precision for an 8-year-old, adding intricate details that made Miss Peterson pause as she walked by. The teacher had been distributing fresh sheets of construction paper to those who had finished their initial drawings. But she froze mid-step when she caught a glimpse of what was taking shape on Emma's desk. "That's quite remarkable, Emma," she whispered, careful not to disturb the other children who were finishing their own artwork. Ms. Peterson had taught art to elementary students for over a decade, and she had never seen such technical skill from someone so young, especially not from a child who showed no interest in art during previous class projects. On the paper, a German Shepherd police dog was taking shape with astonishing detail. The animal's intelligent eyes seemed to stare directly out from the page with an almost photographic realism, conveying a sense of protection and loyalty that was almost palpable. Emma had captured the distinctive black and tan markings with remarkable accuracy. The alert ears that tilted slightly forward, as if listening for danger, the powerful stance suggesting readiness to spring into action. Even the official K9 vest, with its reflective patches and specialized pockets. There was a small tear in the dog's left ear, and a distinctive scar above its right eye, details so specific they couldn't possibly be imagined. Most striking of all was the connection between the dog and the tiny figure standing beside it. A small girl with dark hair, whose hand rested on the shepherd's back. The girl's face was turned away, showing only her profile, but the protective stance of the dog told a story of profound connection. In the background, barely sketched but unmistakable, was the outline of what appeared to be the old oak tree that stood at the center of Oakwood Park, its distinctive twisted branches recognizable to anyone in town. Ms. Peterson felt a chill run down her spine, goosebumps rising on her arms despite the overheated classroom. This wasn't the typical stick figure art of a third grader, with its disproportionate bodies and smiling sun in the corner. This showed observation, memory, and emotional connection that suggested Emma had spent significant time with such an animal. Yet according to her parents during the fall parent-teacher conference, they had never owned a dog. And Emma had shown no particular interest in animals beyond the normal childhood fascination. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, the children rushed to gather their belongings, eager to escape into the freedom of the afternoon. Emma, however, remained seated, adding final touches to her masterpiece. Shading around the dog's muzzle, darkening the shadows beneath the oak tree, adding a hint of texture to the animal's fur that created an almost three-dimensional effect. Ms. Peterson busied herself with straightening the classroom, allowing Emma the time she seemed to need. Only when the last of the other students had departed did Emma finally set down her pencil with deliberate care. She studied her creation for a long moment, her head tilted slightly as if listening to a voice only she could hear. Then she did something unprecedented. She carefully folded her drawing with precise, methodical creases and approached Ms. Peterson's desk. Her footsteps were nearly silent on the linoleum floor, but her presence seemed to fill the room with an electric tension. Emma extended the folded paper toward her teacher with trembling hands, her eyes never leaving Ms. Peterson's face. "Would you like me to keep this safe until tomorrow?" Ms. Peterson asked, trying to hide her surprise at this unprecedented interaction. She kept her voice casual, afraid that any indication of how extraordinary this moment was might cause Emma to retreat back into her shell. Emma nodded, a small but definitive movement, then pointed to the classroom door with an urgency that was impossible to misinterpret. Her eyes, usually vacant and distant, now burned with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable to witness. "You want me to show this to someone?" Ms. Peterson guessed, carefully accepting the folded drawing. The paper felt warm from Emma's hands, almost vibrating with importance. Another nod, more emphatic this time. Emma's small finger jabbed repeatedly toward the door, then swept around to indicate the world beyond the classroom. "Who should I show it to, Emma?" Ms. Peterson asked, leaning forward slightly. "Your parents? The principal?" For a moment, it seemed the girl might actually speak. Her lips parted slightly, color rising in her pale cheeks. But then she pressed them firmly together, frustration flashing in her eyes. Instead, she turned and pointed directly at the police officer sticker on the classroom safety poster. Officer Friendly in his blue uniform with his reassuring smile, and the words, "Here to help," printed beneath. "The police?" Ms. Peterson clarified, her confusion growing. "You want me to show your drawing? To the police?" Emma's vigorous nod was accompanied by the first real emotion Ms. Peterson had seen from her all year: hope. It transformed her face completely, softening the tight lines around her mouth and bringing a spark to her eyes that made her suddenly look like the child she was supposed to be, not the haunted shell who had occupied desk 14 since September. When Emma's mother arrived to pick her up minutes later, the girl gathered her backpack without her usual reluctance. As she reached the door, she turned back to look at Ms. Peterson, her eyes flicking meaningfully to the teacher's desk drawer where the drawing had been carefully placed. The message was clear. Don't forget. That evening, Ms. Peterson couldn't shake the image of Emma's drawing from her mind. It haunted her through dinner preparation, through the mindless sitcom she tried to watch, through her usual evening routine of grading papers and preparing the next day's lessons. At 9 o'clock, unable to focus on anything else, she called Emma's parents to discuss the unusual development. "She's never mentioned a police dog to us," Mrs. Reynolds said after a long silence, her voice tense with a mixture of worry and fragile hope. The background noises suggested she had moved to a different room, perhaps to speak privately. Not before or after she stopped speaking. "We've tried everything. Therapy, specialists, even a child psychiatrist who specializes in selective mutism. Nothing has helped." "Has Emma ever had any significant interaction with police or police dogs?" Ms. Peterson pressed gently. "No, nothing like that," Mrs. Reynolds replied, but then hesitated. "Although, last summer, before she stopped speaking, there was an incident at the park. She wandered off for maybe 5 minutes while I was helping her brother with his scraped knee. When we found her near the old oak tree, she seemed different, distant somehow. But she wouldn't tell us what happened. We thought maybe she'd gotten scared being alone, but she'd never been a fearful child before. Within a week, she'd stopped speaking entirely." The mention of the oak tree, the same one from Emma's drawing, sent another chill through Ms. Peterson. Following her instincts and the promise she'd made to Emma with her eyes, she contacted the local police department after hanging up with Mrs. Reynolds. "I know this sounds strange," she explained to the officer who answered, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of Emma's folded drawing, which she'd brought home with her. "But I have a student who hasn't spoken in months, and today she drew a remarkably detailed police dog. She specifically wanted me to show it to the police. I wouldn't normally call. But something about this feels important." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled only with the soft sound of breathing and the faint click of computer keys. "Can you describe the dog in the drawing?" the officer finally asked, his voice suddenly alert with an edge that hadn't been there before. Ms. Peterson described the drawing in detail. The distinctive scar above the dog's right eye, the tear in its left ear, the unusual pattern on its K9 vest, the tag on its collar that read, "Hero," in block letters. As she spoke, the typing sounds on the other end of the line grew more rapid. "And you said there's a park in the background?" the officer asked, his voice now tight with what sounded like controlled excitement. "Yes, it looks like the big oak at Oakwood Park. Officer, what's going on? Do you recognize this description?" "Ms. Peterson," the officer said, his tone now deadly serious, "I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning with Detective Ramirez. Please don't show that drawing to anyone else and keep it somewhere secure until we arrive. This could be connected to an ongoing investigation." What Ms. Peterson couldn't know was that the police department had lost their beloved K9 officer, Hero, 3 months earlier. Not to death, but to retirement after 7 years of distinguished service. The aging shepherd now lived with his handler, Detective James Ramirez, enjoying a well-earned rest after helping solve dozens of cases and saving multiple lives. And the last case Hero had worked on before his retirement was a child abduction attempt at Oakwood Park, the very park where Emma had wandered off last summer. A case that had gone cold when the only witness, a child, couldn't be located. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but no one could have predicted the emotional storm that would be unleashed when Hero's former handler walked into Ms. Peterson's classroom the next morning, accompanied by a graying German shepherd whose eyes matched exactly those in Emma's drawing. Intelligent, protective, and somehow knowing. For the first time in months, the fortress around Emma Reynolds was about to crumble, and the truth she had been unable to speak would finally find its voice. The following morning arrived with a tense anticipation that seemed to electrify the air in room 14. Ms. Peterson had arrived an hour early. Emma's drawing carefully preserved in a manila folder inside her desk drawer. She had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The night had been punctuated with vivid dreams of German shepherds and oak trees, of children's voices silenced by fear and secrets hidden in pencil sketches. The classroom felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, expectant somehow, as if the very walls understood that today marked a turning point. Ms. Peterson moved methodically through her morning preparations, checking lesson plans that she knew she might not follow, arranging desks that might soon be witnesses to something extraordinary. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted to the drawer containing Emma's drawing, as if to reassure herself it hadn't somehow vanished overnight. Outside, the November sky lightened grudgingly from charcoal to steel gray, rain threatening but not yet falling. The school's ancient heating system clanked and groaned as it pushed warmth through the building, a counterpoint to Miss Peterson's racing thoughts. What if Emma refused to acknowledge the dog? What if the police were wrong about the connection? What if this fragile hope shattered, pushing the little girl even deeper into her silence? At precisely 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the students were scheduled to arrive, a firm knock sounded at the classroom door. Ms. Peterson's heart leaped into her throat as she crossed the room to answer it, her sensible shoes squeaking slightly against the freshly waxed linoleum. Standing in the hallway was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. His badge identified him as Detective James Ramirez. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of countless hours staring at crime scene photos and interview transcripts, searching for the patterns that others missed. His navy blue jacket bore the subtle bulge of a service weapon, but his demeanor was calm and measured. But it was his companion that made Miss Peterson's breath catch. A dignified German shepherd with graying fur around his muzzle, a distinctive scar above his right eye, and a torn left ear that matched Emma's drawing with uncanny precision. Even without his K9 vest, the dog's bearing spoke of years of service and unwavering loyalty. He stood at perfect attention beside Detective Ramirez, his amber eyes alert and assessing, missing nothing. "Thank you for calling us, Ms. Peterson," Detective Ramirez said quietly, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had spent years delivering both terrible news and rare moments of justice. "This is Hero. He's retired now, but he was our best tracking dog for 7 years. 3 commendations and more successful finds than any other K9 in the department's history." Hero's intelligent eyes scanned the classroom methodically, his nose twitching as he cataloged the scents of 23 children who had yet to arrive. Ms. Peterson noticed that despite his obvious age, the gray around his muzzle, the slight stiffness in his movements, the shepherd carried himself with the dignity of a career officer. There was something almost human in his gaze, a depth of understanding that transcended species. "The drawing is in my desk," Ms. Peterson said, leading them into the empty classroom. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silent room, punctuated by the soft click of Hero's nails on the floor. "But I should warn you, Emma hasn't spoken a word in 4 months. Not to her parents, not to our school counselor, not to the child psychologist they've been taking her to weekly. Even if Hero is the dog from her drawing, I don't know if seeing him will change that." Detective Ramirez nodded solemnly, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "We understand. We're not here to pressure the child. But if Emma witnessed what we think she might have, her testimony, in whatever form it takes, could be crucial. This case has been haunting our department for months." Ms. Peterson retrieved the folder and handed it to the detective, watching his face carefully as he accepted it. As he unfolded Emma's drawing, his expression shifted from professional detachment to visible shock. Beside him, Hero's ears perked forward, a low whine escaping from his throat as he strained to see the paper in his handler's hands. "This is—" Ramirez trailed off, his fingers tracing the outline of the K9 vest Emma had drawn with such precision. "This is Hero's old tactical vest. We retired it when he left service. The details are exact, even the special modification we made for his radio transmitter." He looked up, his eyes intense. "Ms. Peterson, there's no way your student could have invented these details. This vest wasn't standard issue. It was customized for Hero alone after he was injured during a rescue operation 3 years ago. The department fabricator had to create this specific pocket arrangement to accommodate his mobility needs." The detective crouched down, showing the drawing to the shepherd. Hero's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He sniffed the paper thoroughly, his nose working overtime, then looked up at his handler with an alertness that belied his age, his tail beginning to wag with increasing enthusiasm. "He recognizes something," Ramirez said softly, a note of wonder creeping into his professional tone. "Or someone. Hero was always exceptional at scent identification, even for a shepherd. If there's a connection between your student and this dog, he'll know it the moment he sees her." The sound of children's voices in the hallway, still distant but growing closer, signaled the approaching start of the school day. Detective Ramirez quickly explained their plan. He would wait in the adjoining resource room with Hero while Ms. Peterson conducted her normal morning routine. Once the children were settled, she would bring Emma to meet them privately, away from the curious eyes of her classmates. "We don't want to overwhelm her," Ramirez explained, his hand resting lightly on Hero's head. "And if this doesn't go as we hope, we don't want to create a spectacle that might push her further into isolation." Ms. Peterson agreed, showing them to the small room connected to her classroom. Originally designed as a teacher's planning area, it had been converted to a quiet reading space with a small round table, several comfortable chairs, and shelves of books. Detective Ramirez settled himself in the corner, Hero sitting obediently at his side, both of them prepared to wait as long as necessary. One by one, the third graders filtered into the classroom, hanging up their backpacks and chattering about television shows and playground politics. The usual morning energy filled the room. Jacob and Tyler arguing over yesterday's soccer match. Sophia showing Madison her new charm bracelet. Aiden struggling with his math homework at the last minute. Ms. Peterson greeted each child by name, maintaining the routine that provided structure to their days, all while acutely aware of the 2 waiting figures in the resource room. Emma arrived last, slipping in quietly just as the bell rang. Ms. Peterson noticed immediately that something was different. The little girl's eyes darted around the room searchingly, an unusual alertness in her posture. Her typically disheveled hair had been carefully brushed, and she wore a clean blue sweater that looked new, as if she had somehow sensed that today was significant. "She's looking for the drawing," Ms. Peterson realized with sudden clarity. "She's worried I forgot my promise." After the Pledge of Allegiance and morning announcements, while the other children began their daily journal writing, Ms. Peterson approached Emma's desk. The little girl looked up, her expression a mixture of apprehension and fragile hope. "Emma, there are some people who would like to meet you," Ms. Peterson said softly, pitching her voice so only Emma could hear. "Would you come with me for a few minutes?" For the first time all year, Emma didn't hesitate or shrink away from interaction. She stood immediately, her small hands clenched at her sides with determination. Ms. Peterson assigned Tyler, whose newfound sense of responsibility made him unexpectedly reliable. to monitor the class for the few minutes she would be absent, then led Emma to the resource room door, knocking softly before opening it. Detective Ramirez had positioned himself on a child-sized chair in the corner, Hero sitting obediently at his side. When the door opened, the shepherd's head swiveled toward them, his nose working overtime, his body suddenly tense with alertness. The detective's hand remained lightly on the dog's collar, not restraining, merely a point of connection between handler and animal. What happened next would be etched in Ms. Peterson's memory forever. A moment of pure emotion that transcended words. Emma froze in the doorway, her eyes locked on the German shepherd. Her small body went completely still, not even seeming to breathe. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The only sound was the distant murmur of children's voices from the classroom and the soft patter of rain that had begun to fall outside. Then a sound escaped the little girl's throat, a small, broken sob that seemed to contain months of pent-up emotion, fear finally giving way to recognition and relief. "Hero," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse but unmistakably clear. The shepherd's reaction was instantaneous and electric. He rose to his feet, a high whine escaping his throat, his entire body quivering with recognition. His tail wagged so vigorously that his entire hindquarters moved with it. Detective Ramirez, clearly shocked at both Emma's speech and Hero's response, released his light hold on Hero's collar. "He knows her," he said, his professional composure momentarily forgotten. "In 30 years of police work, I've never seen him react like this to anyone." The old police dog crossed the room with the dignity of his training, stopping precisely 2 feet in front of Emma. Close enough to touch, but not so close as to frighten. He lowered his head slightly, those intelligent eyes never leaving her face, his posture communicating a mixture of deference and protection that spoke volumes about his years of service. With trembling fingers, Emma reached out and touched the scar above Hero's eye, tracing its familiar outline exactly as she had drawn it. "You found me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You found me again." Then she threw her arms around the shepherd's neck and buried her face in his fur, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Hero stood rock steady, bearing her weight easily, his body positioned protectively around her small frame. Over Emma's shoulder, the dog's eyes met Detective Ramirez's with a clear message that required no translation. "I know this child. I have been waiting." Ms. Peterson felt tears welling in her own eyes, the power of the moment overwhelming her professional detachment. Something profound was happening. A reconnection, a recognition, a healing that transcended her understanding. "Emma," Detective Ramirez said gently, remaining seated to appear less intimidating, his voice soft with wonder. "Did you meet Hero at the park last summer?" The little girl nodded against Hero's fur, her arms still wrapped tightly around him, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. The shepherd remained perfectly still, allowing her to draw whatever comfort she needed from his presence. "Can you tell us what happened that day?" he asked, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of months of investigation. "We've been trying to understand for a very long time." Slowly, Emma pulled back from Hero, though she kept one hand buried in his thick fur as if drawing strength from the connection. She looked first at Ms. Peterson, who nodded encouragingly, then at Detective Ramirez, her eyes still swimming with tears, but now holding something else. Determination. "The man said he lost his puppy," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word, like a stream that had been dammed for months suddenly finding its natural course again. "He asked if I would help him look behind the big tree." As Emma's story unfolded, of a would-be abductor, of Hero appearing suddenly through the bushes while on a training exercise, of the man fleeing at the sight of the police dog, of Hero staying with her until his handler caught up. Ms. Peterson understood at last the complexity of the trauma that had silenced this child. Emma hadn't been traumatized just by the attempted abduction, but by the adult's failure to believe her story about a police dog saving her. In her 8-year-old mind, if they didn't believe that truth, they wouldn't believe anything else she said. So she had stopped speaking entirely, retreating into a silence that felt safer than disbelief. Until now. Until Hero had found her again, living proof that her experience had been real. He told me to stay very still, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as Hero pressed reassuringly against her legs. The man ran away when Hero barked. Then Hero sat next to me until the police officer came. He let me hold his special tag. She looked down at the shepherd with a mixture of awe and affection. He wasn't scared at all. By the time Emma finished her account, Detective Ramirez was rapidly taking notes, his face grim but satisfied. The description she provided matched their suspect in 2 other attempted abductions, cases that had stalled for lack of evidence. Details about the man's appearance, his distinctive limp, the unusual snake tattoo on his wrist. All of it aligned with surveillance footage they had gathered, but couldn't definitively link to a suspect. "Emma," he said when she had finished, closing his notebook with a decisive snap. "You are the bravest person I've met in a very long time. Hero thought so too. That's why he remembered you all this time." The little girl looked down at the shepherd, who had settled comfortably against her legs. "Can he come visit me sometimes?" she asked, her voice stronger now, as if each word broke more of the chains that had bound her in silence. "I think that could be arranged," Ramirez said, smiling for the first time, the expression transforming his stern features. "Hero is retired now, but we're developing a new program where former police dogs visit schools to help children learn about safety and trust. I think he'd make an excellent ambassador, don't you?" Emma nodded solemnly, then looked up at Miss Peterson with clear eyes that held no shadows for the first time all year. "I'm sorry I didn't talk before," she said simply. "Nobody believed me about the dog. They said I made him up because I was scared." Miss Peterson knelt down beside her student, careful not to dislodge Hero from his protective position. "I believe you now, Emma, and I promise, from now on, we'll always listen. All of us." She glanced at Detective Ramirez, who nodded his agreement. "Hero never forgot you," he said. "And now, thanks to your brave drawing, we can find the man who scared you and make sure he doesn't frighten any other children." When they returned to the classroom 10 minutes later, Emma walked differently. Shoulders back, head high, one small but significant step closer to healing. Hero had reluctantly remained in the resource room with Detective Ramirez, who needed to make several urgent calls to the precinct. But Emma carried something of the shepherd's dignity with her as she returned to her desk. The other children, sensing something momentous but unable to define it, watched her with curious eyes. Ms. Peterson smoothly redirected their attention to the math lesson, but she noticed how Emma now sat straighter in her chair, her pencil poised over her notebook with new purpose. And when Ms. Peterson called on her during the lesson later that morning, asking, "Emma, what's 6 times 7? 22 children gasped in unison as a clear voice answered, 42. The fortress walls had finally crumbled, and Emma Reynolds had found her voice again, thanks to a drawing, a dedicated teacher, and a retired police dog who had never forgotten the little girl he had once saved. In the days that followed, the story unfolded like the final chapters of a mystery novel. Detective Ramirez used Emma's testimony to identify and arrest Martin Greeley, a man with a history of child predation who had been operating in 3 counties. 2 other families came forward with similar stories, though their children had been fortunate enough to escape before being isolated. Emma's detailed description of the man's appearance, mannerisms, and vehicle provided the final pieces needed to build an airtight case. Hero became a regular visitor to Oakwood Elementary, not just to see Emma, but as part of the newly established K-9 Reading Buddies program, where children who struggled with reading or speaking could practice by reading aloud to the patient, non-judgmental shepherd. The sight of the aging police dog lying contentedly while nervous readers stumbled through picture books became a familiar one in Miss Peterson's classroom. For Emma, the journey back to full communication would take time. There were still days when words failed her, when the trauma resurfaced in unexpected ways. But those moments grew fewer as weeks passed. The child psychologist who had been unable to reach her for months now marveled at her progress, documenting what would eventually become a landmark case study in selective mutism recovery. Perhaps most meaningful of all was the ceremony held in the school gymnasium 3 months later, where Chief of Police Williams presented Emma with a special Civilian Bravery Award for her help in capturing a dangerous predator. As she accepted the small medal, her parents watching with tears in their eyes, Hero sat proudly at attention beside her, his graying muzzle held high. Hero taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Emma told the assembled students and teachers, her voice clear and strong. It means you do the right thing anyway. As spring bloomed outside the classroom windows, Miss Peterson often reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to Emma's healing. A drawing, a dog, a detective, and the resilience of one small girl who had found her voice again, not just to tell her own story, but to ensure that other children would never have to endure what she had experienced. The fortress walls had not just crumbled, they had been rebuilt into a bridge, connecting Emma to a future where her voice would never again be silenced by fear. 6 months after Emma's reunion with Hero, Oakwood Elementary School had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The hallway leading to Miss Peterson's classroom now featured a vibrant mural painted by the 3rd grade class. A German shepherd standing protectively beside a group of children, with the words "Courage Speaks" arching above in bold primary colors. Principal Donovan, initially skeptical of the K-9 Reading Buddies program, had become its most vocal advocate after witnessing dramatic improvements in reading scores across multiple grade levels. For Ms. Peterson, the changes in her classroom dynamics were nothing short of miraculous. Emma, once isolated by her silence, had emerged as a quiet leader among her peers. While still reserved by nature, she now participated in class discussions, joined group activities, and had formed a small but loyal circle of friends. The other children, witnessing her transformation, had absorbed an unspoken but powerful lesson about resilience and second chances. On a crisp spring morning, Ms. Peterson watched from her classroom window as Emma arrived at school. The little girl no longer slipped in at the last possible moment, but instead walked confidently alongside Madison and Sophia, the 3 of them engaged in animated conversation. Emma's laughter, once so rare that its first appearance had brought tears to Ms. Peterson's eyes, now rang out regularly, a clear, bell-like sound that seemed to make up for months of silence. "Good morning, Miss Peterson," Emma said brightly as she entered the classroom, hanging her backpack on its designated hook. "Hero's coming today, right?" "Yes, Detective Ramirez confirmed they'll be here at 1 o'clock. Ms. Peterson replied, smiling at the anticipation in Emma's voice. The bi-weekly visits from the retired police dog had become a highlight not just for Emma, but for the entire class. And I believe he's bringing a surprise. Emma's eyes widened with curiosity, but she didn't press for details, instead turning to help Tyler with a science project they'd been working on together. Ms. Peterson marveled at the change in the girl, how she had learned to balance patience with healthy curiosity, caution with courage. The morning passed in a productive blur of fractions and state history. After lunch, as the children returned to the classroom, there was an electric buzz of excitement. Hero's visits had become legendary throughout the school, with children from other classes often finding creative excuses to pass by Miss Peterson's room during the Shepherd's appearances. At precisely 1:09 p.m., a knock sounded at the classroom door. Emma, who had been appointed the official greeter for Hero's visits, rose from her seat and walked to the door with dignified purpose. When she opened it, her delighted gasp was audible throughout the room. Detective Ramirez stood in the hallway with Hero at his side, the shepherd's tail already wagging in recognition. But beside them was a second dog, younger, with the same distinctive German shepherd markings, but lacking Hero's gray muzzle and battle scars. "Emma, class, I'd like you to meet Nova," Detective Ramirez announced as the children gathered around. "She's just completed her K-9 training and is officially joining our department next week. Since Hero has been such an important part of your class, we thought you might like to meet the newest member of our team." Nova sat obediently beside Hero, her posture mirroring the older dog's dignified bearing, but with the barely contained energy of youth. Her intelligent eyes scanned the classroom, taking in the children with alert interest. "She's beautiful," Emma breathed, kneeling to greet the new arrival after giving Hero his customary hug. "Does she do the same work Hero did?" Detective Ramirez nodded, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "She does. In fact, Hero has been helping with parts of her training. But Nova has a special assignment that Hero never had. She's been trained specifically to work with children who have experienced trauma. She'll be visiting hospitals, courtrooms, and schools to help kids feel safe when they need to talk about difficult things." Ms. Peterson caught the significance immediately. Nova represented a direct response to Emma's case, a recognition by the police department that children like Emma needed specialized support. From the thoughtful expression on Emma's face, she understood too. "The chief asked me to tell you that Nova's training was inspired by you, Emma," Detective Ramirez continued, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact, respecting the girl's dislike of excessive attention. "Your courage gave us the idea that other children might need a special friend like Hero when they're scared." Emma's cheeks flushed with pride as she gently stroked Nova's sleek head. "Will she get a special vest like Hero's?" she asked. "She will," Ramirez confirmed. "But we thought you might have some ideas about how it should look. Nova's vest needs to be friendly and non-threatening, while still identifying her as a working police dog. Would your class be interested in submitting design ideas?" The excited chorus of "yes" that erupted from 23 voices needed no further interpretation. Mrs. Peterson quickly organized the children into small groups, distributing paper and colored pencils for initial design concepts. As they worked, Detective Ramirez circulated among them, answering questions about K-9 officers while Hero and Nova patiently accepted gentle pats and scratches from admiring hands. Ms. Peterson found herself standing beside Emma, who was carefully sketching a vest design with precise, confident strokes. The transformation from the silent, withdrawn child of 6 months ago to this engaged, purposeful student still amazed her. "You've come so far, Emma," she said quietly. "I'm very proud of you." Emma looked up, her expression serious. "Ms. Peterson, do you think my drawing helped other kids? Kids who might have been hurt by that man?" The question caught Miss Peterson off guard with its directness and insight. In the months since Emma had identified Martin Greeley, the case had expanded significantly. 2 other children had come forward with similar experiences, their testimonies bolstered by Emma's brave example. Greeley now faced multiple charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for decades. "Yes, Emma," she answered honestly. "Your drawing helped in ways you might not even understand until you're older. You protected other children by being brave enough to tell your story." Emma nodded, returning to her sketch with renewed focus. "That's what I thought," she said simply. "That's why I'm not scared anymore. Being scared doesn't help other people." From across the room, Hero's amber eyes seemed to meet Miss Peterson's with shared understanding. The old police dog had spent his career protecting the vulnerable, and somehow he had passed that legacy on to a small girl who now understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to move beyond it. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, illuminating the busy, happy scene, Miss Peterson thought about the extraordinary journey they had all taken together. A child silenced by trauma had found her voice again. A retired police dog had found a new purpose. And a teacher had been reminded of education's most powerful lesson: that sometimes the greatest learning happens not through textbooks or tests, but through the connections we forge in moments of truth and trust. Emma's drawing, now framed and hanging in the police station's community room, had become more than evidence in a criminal case. It had become a symbol of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond between a brave little girl and the dog who had twice come to find her, once in a moment of danger and again in a time of healing. As Nova rested her head gently on Emma's knee, the circle seemed complete. Past connecting to future, fear transformed into purpose, silence giving way to a voice that would never again be stilled. 1 year to the day after Emma's reunion with Hero, Ms. Peterson sat in the auditorium of Oakwood Elementary, surrounded by proud parents, nervous students, and community members who had gathered for the school's annual Recognition Day ceremony. The stage was decorated with colorful banners proclaiming, "Courage in our community." This year's theme, chosen by a student committee Emma had helped lead. Principal Donovan stood at the podium, his usual stern demeanor softened by the significance of the occasion. "Today marks the 1-year anniversary of a program that has transformed our school and rippled outward to touch our entire community," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. The K-9 Companions Initiative, which began in Miss Peterson's 3rd grade classroom, has now expanded to 17 schools across our district and inspired similar programs in 3 neighboring states. Ms. Peterson felt a swell of pride as she glanced at Emma, sitting with her classmates in the front row. Now in 4th grade, Emma had blossomed into a confident student whose academic performance matched her newfound social ease. The severe trauma that had once silenced her had been transformed into a quiet strength that drew other children to her like a gentle magnet. None of this would have been possible, Principal Donovan continued, without the courage of one student, the dedication of one teacher, and the remarkable bond with a retired police dog named Hero. On cue, the side door to the auditorium opened, and Detective Ramirez entered with Hero and Nova, walking proudly beside him. Hero moved more slowly now, his muzzle almost completely gray, but his bearing remained dignified and alert. Nova, by contrast, was in her prime, sleek, powerful, and wearing the special K-9 therapy vest that had been designed based on Emma's winning sketch. With its distinctive blue and silver pattern and the embroidered motto, "Courage has 4 paws." Behind them came 3 more handlers with their dogs. Ranger, a chocolate Labrador who specialized in working with children with autism. Stella, a gentle golden retriever trained for hospital visits. And Max, a black and white border collie who helped children with reading difficulties. All wore variations of the vest Nova had debuted, now the official uniform of the expanded K9 Companions program. A ripple of excitement passed through the audience as the dogs and their handlers took their places at the side of the stage. Emma's parents, seated in the second row, reached for each other's hands, their eyes shining with unshed tears. Ms. Peterson knew they still struggled with guilt over not believing their daughter's story about the dog who had saved her. But they had channeled that regret into tireless advocacy for the program that had restored Emma's voice. Today, we celebrate not just the success of a program, Principal Donovan said, but the remarkable chain of events that remind us how one act of courage can transform many lives. I'd like to invite Chief Williams to the stage to tell us more about the impact of this initiative. Chief Williams, a formidable presence in his dress uniform, approached the podium with measured steps. His reputation as a tough, no-nonsense leader made his support of the K9 Companions program all the more significant. When Detective Ramirez first proposed expanding Hero's work into a formal program, the chief began. I was skeptical. Police resources are always stretched thin, and I wasn't convinced that therapy dogs should be a priority. He paused, his stern expression softening. I have rarely been so happy to be proven wrong. A gentle laugh rippled through the audience. In the past year, our K9 companions have assisted 27 children in giving court testimony that helped convict dangerous offenders. They have supported over 100 children through medical procedures and hospital stays. And perhaps most remarkably, they have helped improve reading scores in participating classrooms by an average of 23%. The chief gestured toward Emma and her classmates. But statistics don't tell the full story. The true impact is written on the faces of these children, in their confidence, their compassion, and their understanding that courage comes in many forms. Ms. Peterson watched as Emma straightened in her seat, her expression serious but serene. The journey from traumatized silence to poised self-assurance had not been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks, nightmares that returned without warning, moments when words still failed her, days when the weight of her experience seemed too heavy to bear. But through it all, Hero had been her steadfast companion. And gradually, Emma had learned to carry her story not as a burden, but as a source of strength. I would now like to invite Emma Reynolds and Ms. Peterson to the stage, Chief Williams announced, to unveil a special recognition. Emma rose with quiet dignity and made her way to the stage, Ms. Peterson following close behind. As they reached the podium, Hero broke protocol slightly, moving forward to press against Emma's leg in greeting. A collective awe rose from the audience at this display of the bond between child and dog. Chief Williams produced a plaque from beneath the podium. This will be installed next week at the entrance to our new K9 training center, he explained. We wanted Emma to be the first to see it. The bronze plaque bore an engraving of Hero in his prime, standing alert and watchful. Beneath the image were the words, "The Hero K9 Training Center established 2026." Because courage speaks in many voices. Hero will be retiring fully next month, Chief Williams explained. But his legacy will continue through this center, where future generations of service dogs will be trained to help children find their voices, just as Emma found hers. Emma traced the engraving with gentle fingers, her eyes wide with wonder. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped up to the microphone. "May I say something?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. Chief Williams nodded, stepping aside to give her access to the podium. When I couldn't talk, Emma began, her gaze moving across the sea of faces before settling on Hero. It wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Hero showed me that the truth is always worth telling, even when it's scary. She paused, gathering her thoughts with a maturity that belied her 9 years. Now there are lots of kids who have dogs like Hero to help them tell their truth. And there are grown-ups who listen better because they know that sometimes the most important stories are the hardest ones to tell. Ms. Peterson felt tears welling in her eyes as Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Hero didn't just save me from a bad person. He saved my voice. And now, because of him, other kids won't have to be silent when scary things happen. That's why courage speaks in many voices. Because when one person is brave enough to tell their truth, it helps everyone else find their voice too. The auditorium erupted in applause as Emma finished speaking. Chief Williams, visibly moved, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his gruff voice unusually soft. "You've taught us all something important today." As Emma returned to her seat, accompanied by Hero who seemed unwilling to leave her side, Miss Peterson reflected on the extraordinary journey they had all taken together. From a silent child and a drawing that spoke volumes, to a community transformed by the understanding that healing happens not in isolation, but in connection, with each other, with devoted animals, with the truth itself. The ceremony continued with other recognitions and awards. But for Ms. Peterson, the most powerful moment had already occurred. She watched as Emma sat between her classmates, one hand resting on Hero's head, her expression peaceful and present. The fortress walls that had once imprisoned her had not just crumbled. They had been rebuilt into bridges, connecting her to a future where her voice would continue to inspire others to find their own. Later, as the crowd dispersed and families gathered in the school gymnasium for refreshments, Ms. Peterson found herself standing beside Detective Ramirez, watching Emma demonstrate to a group of younger children how to properly approach a service dog. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" she asked quietly, gesturing to the bustling room filled with children, parents, therapy dogs, and handlers. Ramirez shook his head, his weathered face thoughtful. "In 30 years of police work, I've seen how violence and fear can ripple outward, touching dozens of lives beyond the immediate victim. But this is the first time I've seen healing ripple out with the same power." He nodded toward Emma, who was now helping a shy kindergartner gently stroke Nova's fur. "She's going to change the world, that one." "She already has," Ms. Peterson replied, thinking of the silent classroom of a year ago and the vibrant learning community it had become. One voice at a time. As if sensing they were talking about her, Emma looked up and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her serious face into that of the child she was meant to be. Beside her, Hero sat at perfect attention, his aging body still the embodiment of dignity and service, his amber eyes reflecting the wisdom of a life dedicated to protection and now, in his golden years, to healing. The fortress walls had fallen, the bridges were built, and Emma Reynolds, once silenced by fear, had found not just her voice, but her purpose. In the drawing that had started it all, she had captured not just Hero's likeness, but the essence of what he represented. The unbreakable bond between protector and protected. The courage to stand guard over truth. And the power of connection to heal even the deepest wounds. As the afternoon sun slanted through the gymnasium windows, casting long golden rays across the gathered community, Ms. Peterson knew with absolute certainty that this story, Emma's story, Hero's story, their story, would continue to unfold in ways none of them could yet imagine, touching lives far beyond the walls of Oakwood Elementary, speaking courage into existence, one voice at a time.